Good afternoon, everyone. I am Professor Mark Weidenmeyer. I'm the director of the Lowe Institute of Political Economy, and the Lowe Institute is sponsoring a mini conference today on immigration. So we are fortunate to have two guest speakers today, and to my far right is Giovanni Peri. He's the professor of economics and the chair of the Department of Economics at the University of California, Davis, and he's an immigration expert. And then to my immediate right is Professor Bill Lincoln, who is CMC's resident expert on immigration, on economics and immigration. So we're going to start off the talk with, I'm going to read off a question, and then we'll start with Giovanni, followed by Bill. We'll give a few minutes for each question we have, and then the last 10 minutes, we're going to leave the floor open for student questions. Okay, so I'd like to start off with the following question. One of the most controversial policy proposals for either presidential candidate is Donald Trump's intention to build a wall on the border with Mexico. Do you think Mexico could in fact be made to pay for it, and do you think it would be effective in reducing illegal immigration?
Yeah, so the first question is relatively easy, the way I see it. If you were at my talk this morning, you realize that net immigration from Mexico has been zero for the last 10 years. So building a wall will not do anything to that. There is already a very strong fence in many places, and de facto immigration with Mexico has declined a lot. So a wall will be costly, will be a bad image for the US. I have no idea how they will pay for it. So I would say, no, this is an idea which is based on some prejudice, but will not really start addressing some of the real question in immigration and real immigration policy for the US.
I would agree. So the best estimate of the cost of this that I've seen is from a think tank in Washington, D.C. called the American Action Forum, which is run by I think it's John McCain's old economic advisor. They put it at $500 to $600 billion. I don't see that. Actually, that was actually the cost of deporting everyone, I should say. But the wall itself, I do think would be extremely costly. Even if you wanted to do it, there are lots of places in the border where it's not even necessary. So it's unclear whether this is really being proposed for practical purposes or whether it's more of a political play, so to speak. The way that they've, the campaign has suggested paying for it by seizing remittances and things like that would not get even close to being able to pay for it. So, yeah, I think the answer is no, and I don't think the wall would be effective as well.
Okay, our next question. Both Donald Trump's mother and wife are immigrants, yet he's run a campaign that has been explicitly restrictionist. More generally, do you think that some Americans tend to support immigration policies that are at odds with their own personal experience?
So it's interesting. When on the poll, when people are polled about their attitude towards immigration, being child of an immigrant or of two immigrants normally is associated with a more open attitude towards immigration. However, over time, there has always been in American history this tendency of the earlier group to consider the later comer group as not worthy of immigration in the US. At the beginning of the 1900s, so in 1910, 1920, when the Italians, the Polish, the Irish were coming, the Germans who had come 40 20, 30 years before, were looking at them as these people are Catholic, they are different. So sometimes there is this attitude. Now, in fact, some of the Italian and people with Italian and Irish root are among the strong supporter of the nativist against the new wave of immigration. So while I think in the immediate, people are more open to immigration if they come from immigration background, in the longer run, it could be that there is this, and in particular if politicians succeed in creating this one group against the other type of dynamics, there could be some of that attitude of people who have an inheritance from abroad being against.
I think the evidence is really clear that is the case. I would say as people come to the United States, they intermarry, they get to know one another. These types of prejudices tend to fade, but then if you have different groups coming in, then it's almost like the same problem over again. You would imagine that people would sort of learn over time that there's nothing to fear, but I wouldn't say that this is something that's unique to the United States. A lot of other countries have had similar experiences where the earlier groups tend to be more restrictionist than the later groups. You see that in the UK, for example. I do think that there's somewhat of a sort of disconnect there in terms of, the vast majority of the people in the United States are descended from immigrants. So you would think that the country would be open, but these issues definitely have come up time and time again. So.
All right. Our next question is, Hillary Clinton has suggested that she would be willing to accept up to 65,000 Syrian refugees, despite her rivals' claims that this would pose a threat to national security. Do you think that the United States would be able to properly vet these refugees for such concerns? I got one more.
Sorry.
Do you think that we should accept them anyway? Do you think accepting this number of refugees would make a significant impact in easing the crisis?
So there are 5.8 million of Syrian refugees. Most of them are in Turkey and Jordan, about 80% of them. 1 million of them may go to Europe, and we're discussing about 50,000, maybe 60,000 to the United States. The process of vetting international, the refugee that makes it into the United States is a very, 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 very small portion, incredibly selected. There is a very rigorous process in which the United Nations High Council vets these people first when they arrive in the refugee camp, follow them, and before they come to the United States, so much is known about this refugee, which is a way more than is known about a lot of tourists and a lot of students, in fact, that come. So the vetting process is incredibly demanding. I think that this humanitarian crisis that goes on in Syria, which is very serious, of which both Europe and the US are carrying only a very small fraction, is really affecting the nation. Almost the acceptance of this will be more symbolic than substantial. This is going to be a small group. There is a lot of evidence in the past that shows that refugees actually who have come from countries have integrated pretty well. The biggest group that we can study are the Vietnamese after the Vietnam War, and a lot of them have become incredibly successful entrepreneur employees. So I think, and a lot of the Syrian, by the way, who will come are going to be relatively highly educated professional, a lot of doctors, a lot of teachers. They are the ones who want to come to the United States. And as a consequence, I would say, yes, this seems to me a non-problem. Of course, there is a terrorism problem that we need to identify, and there are international connections. But the refugees is very different. It's just like mixing the Mexican immigrant with the drugs cartel that smuggle things in. So I think let's separate this. I think the vetting process is very good. I think this is a very small number. They are dispersed, by the way, by this policy. They're not concentrated in a place. So they will have a very limited effect. And I think the United States can definitely do it. And again, from a humanitarian point of view, and even from an integration, I think should do it.
I think vetting the refugees coming from Syria to the extent that people have said that they want to do it would be completely impossible. It's completely impossible to follow everyone's history who wants to come here. Documents don't exist. But I don't see how that's any different from migrants from other countries. And so I don't see this as disproportionately a problem relative to migrants from, say, another country in the region, for example. So it's unclear to me why we should accept immigrants from those countries and not accept the Syrian refugees. In terms of the 65,000 figure, I agree that's a really small number in terms of the number of people who have been displaced both out of Syria as well as within Syria. There are even many million more people who have been displaced within Syria. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I would actually be in favor of increasing that number, but that's a personal preference, I guess.
All right, on to the next question. Hillary Clinton has suggested that we could add hundreds of billions of dollars to our GDP by passing comprehensive immigration reform. Do you think this rough figure is accurate? If not, what do you think an accurate figure would be?
It's hard to put an accurate figure. I have read a lot of these documents that the Council of Economic Advisor of the President has put together, trying to estimate the impact of a regularization, right? We're talking about just the impact of a legalization. There's certainly going to be big impact on the wages of these people that will rise probably because these people will have access to better job, their productivity will go up. There may be a little bit of an increase also in cost in welfare access that they will have, depending on how it's done. I would say that is definitely the gains for the American GDP will be in the order of some hundreds million, just because these people are 11 million themselves. And so even a relative small few $100s gain for each will go into the 100 millions of gains. I think sort of more importantly that the long run impact will be important and good, because these people will invest more in learning the language, learning skill, which are valued in the US. Their children are going to be more committed. Some of these families live in fear that one of the parents can be deported, and a lot of their US-born children are in this uncertainty. So I think that some of the benefit will accrue over time as these people, as these kids grow, and they are kept in school because their parents finally have certainty of staying here. They invest in them. So yes, in the long run, I think we're talking about hundreds of millions of net benefit. And of course, you know, there are going to be some cost, even if just logistically, to organize the legalization. But they are a minuscule fraction of the cost of the alternative will be the deportation, which seems to be incredibly expensive with none of these benefits.
The numbers are it's difficult to estimate these things, but if you have about 11 million people in the United States who are undocumented, getting up to hundreds of billions of dollars in the short run, I think I'm not sure the benefits would be really as large as that, but I think I agree that in the long run, the effects could easily get to that level, particularly when you think about the effects of legalization on the children of undocumented workers. That's where I think you really would see really large effects.
Okay, several candidates in this election cycle have suggested moving to a Canadian-style system, where you have a point system. Basically, immigration's tied to some point system where several factors are considered, including the educational background of the potential immigrant. Do you think that the U.S. should move to such a system?
So the point system is interesting, and I think in general has served Canada relatively well. Canada is one of the countries with the biggest percentage of immigrants, a lot of highly skilled. I like a bit more a labor market-based immigration system in the following sense. In Canada, you get points for having degrees, for knowing the language, and then a few points for having a job. And the problem that sometimes they have raised, and some of the recent data identifies that some of these people come to the country and they're not very well plugged. They don't have a job, they don't have, and then they need to downgrade. So they come with a PhD and they find a job at a lower level. In the US, the good part of the system, I think, is that a lot of the system at the employment side is driven by the fact that an employer is looking for a person, has identified a foreigner that can do the job, will have the employment, and hires the person. So that, I think, is a good way, actually, of attracting immigrants which are really demanded and will be productive from day one and will be integrated. The other problem of the point system is that that system will make it almost impossible for people who have low degrees, so non-college educated, to come for working reasons. And this is the other group of immigrants that the US economy has based. So people who come to do agricultural job, construction job, manual works with the elderly people, with the children, that are manual, are in demand, and native workers do less and less. That group will be very hard to attract with the point system, so much so that Canada had to then open up some clauses for specific jobs to attract them. To the contrary, a labor market based will still allow a company to identify a person, if there are not American who are willing to do the job, who comes from abroad and can do it. So I think the point system has some values. To me, it's not the ideal, and to me there are some characteristics of the current American system which are good, and I wouldn't just dump because to pass to a point system.
I tend to agree about the way that the U.S. system is structured, particularly across the business cycle. The way that the U.S. system is structured allows for a lot more flexibility in terms of the immigration system. Getting back to one of Professor Shelton's questions this morning, I think one benefit of the point system is that it's, in some sense, democratically determined. So people can vote for their representatives, and then their representatives will vote for a particular set of criteria. The criteria can be any criteria that the representatives want. And I think, getting to the political and cultural part of this, in addition to the economics, I think that could actually have a positive impact on sort of legitimizing what is going on, just in the sense that you have representatives of the people determining, what is the criteria on who comes in and who comes out. But in terms of flexibility, the U.S. system, I think, provides a lot more flexibility, and that's really quite important when you're thinking about economic outcomes.
All right, so we have just about a little bit less than 10 minutes. So what we'd like to do now is open the floor up for questions.
I'll speak loudly. I'm interested in particularly about the influx of Syrian refugees and American policy regarding Syrians, relating to your talk this morning about about immigrants being centralized around certain cities or in certain states. I know a lot of Syrian refugees have been relocated to Michigan, particularly in the Detroit area. And there have even been articles saying, like, let's just let all the Syrian refugees move into Detroit, given how empty the city is. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the effects of that kind of centralization factor of relocation, both the benefits, because there are a lot of social services in place, particularly in the Detroit area, but also potential downfalls or negative side effects if there aren't a lot of job availability where refugees are being relocated. Thank you.
Happy if you want to go first.
Sure, I can say a few. So actually, there are some specific cities, municipalities, and states that have started running their own program in trying to incentivize attracting some immigrants. And the refugees are a quite interesting group, as you say. As all immigrants, they tend to go where other refugees of the same nationalities are. And definitely, there are some cities of the Rust Belt which are declining. Detroit is an example, would benefit a lot from having a boost of people, as I said, which will be a combination of professional and workers, which could revive the local economy. That's good, I think. I think the risk on the opposite side is that of creating enclave or segregation type of thing. I think the US system has worked pretty well with immigrants going and clustering in some places, but at the same time integrating relatively well, because a city, think of New York or Los Angeles, is a constellation of a bunch of neighborhoods of different nationality that they interplay, and the second generation is fully American. The European model, which has not worked very well, the French model, has been that a lot of some people from some of these countries have concentrated in the neighborhood of Paris, for instance, and they first, second, third generation have stayed there and felt hard access to the labor market, few jobs. So concentration is good, but it has to be accompanied with definitely local economic growth, revitalization, and jobs to be successful. And I think that's something that the Syrian refugee can contribute to. They're not by themselves going to fully generate the revitalization of some locality, but I do think that the combination of a federal policy of distributing them and local policies incentivizing them to locate in some places which are declining is a good recipe, an interesting recipe to work on to guarantee success of the economy and of the Syrian refugee who can integrate.
It's interesting that you mentioned this. The governor of Michigan actually has suggested one way to, and sort of citing some of the work that we talked about this morning, has argued that they would like to take in a lot of people, high-skilled people, and intentionally settle them in Detroit in order to try to revitalize the city. So the city used to have a lot more people than it does now, used to have a lot more economic activity. The governor of Michigan has suggested exactly this type of policy to try to revitalize the city itself. Whether or not that makes sense as a practical thing, I mean, immigration policy is pretty much determined at the federal level. So, whether or not that would work, there's all sorts of questions about that. But I do think that's a particular strategy that might actually work. And in the case of the Syrian refugees, a lot of them are really high-skilled, and so it could, in fact, have the effect that they are thinking about or that they want. In terms of the downsides of it, I lived in Paris for I think 4 months or so. It is very clear that there are some enclaves on the outskirts of the city, and that actually makes, I really do think that it makes discrimination against those communities actually more effective because they are concentrated in one particular locality. And I think that's one of the downsides, that it would be easier for people to not fund their schools well or something like that.
If I may add a super quick thing on this point, I think another benefit, the governor and the mayor of cities sometimes have a very pragmatic approach to this issue, which is let's attract people, they're good, they bring jobs. And although the immigration policy is federal, more involvement of governor and mayor in pressuring and in telling them what are the needs on the ground, I think it can only improve the way in which the federal government, which is a little bit more detached, will think about this problem. So I think it's an added value.
And I think actually would help sort of legitimize a lot of things because it's going through the political process in that sense.
Thank you for your talk this morning. It was really interesting. One question I have is addressing Syrian refugees as well. The rhetoric and fear about letting thousands of people in. Your guys' point about people can come here as students, or people can come traveling, and if they want to do bad things, they can do bad things. The question I have is, when you're a refugee, how does the process being paid to come to this country work? If you want to travel here or go to be a student here, you have to pay. So I'm just curious, how does that work for a refugee? I assume they're not paying their flight or boat here.
So I'm not an expert of the detail of the funding, but I am pretty sure that the United Nations High Council on Refugees is the authority in charge of the refugee from the moment that the person leaves the refugee camp until is in sort of the hands of these local agencies in the United States who resettles the refugees. So the UN certainly pay part of it. Then there are these local resettlement agencies in the United States, which are in part run by, sometimes inspired by charities, in part of government funded, in part charity funded, that arrange the initial settlement or resettlement of refugees. So certainly I would say the High Council and maybe part of these resettlement companies are paying their, the way of the refugees. And there are a few other benefits that the refugees have access to, which I think initially is housing. These people are allowed, these resettlement agency allow them to have housing. Normally it's chosen in places like Detroit, where there is a lot of housing that is not used by many people, and so some of these companies can place. So I would say the technical cost of bringing them here, it's going to be not really on the US taxpayer. And then once they start being here, these people, a lot of them start being productive. They can access labor market. So I think that's going to be a small. I'm not 100% sure if the UN really cover all, or if the UN and the US government certainly contribute in running this operation, and they may pay some.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. I think, I mean, some of the cost of just moving across countries is just, you know, how familiar is the place to you, or things like that. So you can think about monetary costs, but you can think about all sorts of other types of costs as well on the immigrants. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of them are locating in Turkey, and Jordan, and other places. So.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for coming to talk to us today. I had a more general question. I guess according to the internet, happiest countries are, you know, the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and relative to the US, those seem to be fairly homogenous societies that lack diversity. You spoke at the beginning about this attitude that is historically American, that older immigrants, the first generation of immigrants, kind of don't feel that the next generation of immigrants are worthy. And so it seems to me that immigration just leads to diversity of opinions, beliefs, and therefore conflict. So do you think that a more homogenous society, thereby, you know, limiting immigration into a society, creating more, a less diverse society, would lead to more happiness? And also, do you think that we can coexist in a diverse society peacefully without these conflicts?
So don't be fooled by the stereotypes. The percentage of foreign born in Sweden is about the same as in the United States, is about 13%. In Denmark is a little lower. This country have actually admitted a lot of refugees. If you go to Stockholm and Copenhagen, you will see that they are a very international city in the sense that not only people from outside, but other Europeans, Italians, British, Germans are there. They have a big share of that. They don't have such a long history as the United States of immigration, but they are facing exactly the same type of issues they have been in the last 20 years. That to just specify. On the other hand, I see your point. There are some studies that says that, yeah, diversity of ethnicity, religion, culture generates the tendency, not the need for, but the possibility of conflicts. And I think that's exactly where sort of policy can matter, or attitude, or education, or knowing can really matter. I think one huge key thing that in these countries that you mentioned, Denmark and Sweden, are among the happiest. They also have another characteristic. They are almost among the highest scoring in terms of educational attainment of their high school and all their middle school. A very good educational system is step one for integration, for understanding the diversity and the differences as assets rather than as risks, or to fix that. So I acknowledge the existence of this. This is under the eyes of everybody, and Europe is under stress for the fact that a large Muslim population with different value and culture is coming. But I think they also have some of the root of the solution, which are good policy, good education. But of course, some people will want to go the other way, which is close. And I think in the long run, that's not the winning strategy. But yes, I acknowledge the issue. I think it does not need to be an homogeneous society which is happy, but we need to deal with good policy and good educational policy to make it a diverse society, efficient, functioning, and happy.
I mean, I think these are definitely issues. The differences that exist when you bring in people from different countries. I think educational system is really good. Having a good educational system is really important in terms of intergenerational income mobility, socioeconomic status mobility, things like that. The Nordic countries are also, one thing to note about them is that they're very small. They're the size of Indiana or Ohio or things like that. And so, extrapolating out their experiences to very different countries, I think there are at least some issues in doing that. Having said all of that, there are some challenges with this. The United States is a country completely full of immigrants. And there's, we live at peace. We live at peace with one another. There's certainly conflicts among different groups, and there always has been. But I think the U.S. experience is a testament to the benefits of having people from different backgrounds, different points of view, different cultures, things like that.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank Giovanni and Bill for sharing some of their expertise in immigration and immigration policy with us today. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the Athenaeum.
Thanks for coming, Giovanni.